Now let's take a look at the other columns that are included in this template. After you enter the transcript, you then have the option to associate the utterance to the semantic relations. You can make a selection that is appropriate by using this drop-down. If the description that's provided here is not exactly what you need, you can click on the header and then follow the link here. It's going to highlight this table. So you can add additional information here in this space, and if you needed more, you could insert rows in the middle here and it'll just expand the selection. You can make edits to this information as well. By clicking on the header here, you can go back to the language sample template. And so you would go through each of the utterances and indicate whatever is appropriate for that utterance. And it may be that you don't use this column at all, but it's there as an option. We already reviewed the obligatory context. I'm going to reset this so that my header shows the title. And now we're moving on to pronouns. So for each utterance, I have the option of selecting the pronoun that was used in that utterance. Go through that if you want to. It's another option. Anything that you enter here is going to, again, be exported into the analysis tables. And if it was blank, the report would be blank. If for any reason you want to change anything that's here, if you want to add anything to it, each of the columns work in the same way, where if you click on the highlighted yellow word, it'll take you to the table. And in this case, it's highlighting column I. And you can go through this and make any changes in this unshaded area. Column I is going to combine any of the information that you have here and create the drop-down. So the blue highlighted column is actually what's being populated in the drop-down. So if I added a new pronoun, as you can see, when I'm adding all of the relevant details, it's creating this information here, and that information is going to be available in the drop-down. So let's go back to the language sample template and move on to irregular past tense verbs. Works the same way. You have a drop-down. You can go through the utterances, and if a past tense verb was produced, you can select it from your list. And here the child produced got. Once I start typing that, I don't see it on the list. If I drop down and I look for it, it's not there. So this list of information comes from a particular reference, and that reference had a table of verbs and their general month and age of acquisition. So obviously it's not going to have everything. So if the verb that you need to reference is not on the list, just type the verb in and it'll give you an error message, but that's okay. You could jump to the selection where this table is coming from and view the list of verbs. I've expanded the list so that if you needed to, you could add additional verbs, if that's something that you wanted to do. Next, we have the percent of grammatical utterance analysis, and that analysis gets calculated up here based on what you've entered in the sheet here. You'll need to indicate whether that utterance is grammatical, ungrammatical, or are you just going to exclude it. There are situations where you're going to exclude it, and that's up to you. But for situations where the child is just producing a one-word response or an elliptical response, you may choose to exclude it. You set that for each one of your utterances. With this information alone, you can actually view the percent of grammatical utterances. You don't need a description of what type of sentence structure the child produced in order to calculate the percentage of grammatical utterances. So here you see that there is no sentence structure indicator here, and I still have the percent calculated. It's really just looking at how many of those are grammatical and how many of those are ungrammatical. Next, you have the sentence structure type. On an utterance by utterance basis, you can indicate the type of sentence structure that's associated to that utterance. So I filled them in, and now I have additional information on how many simple sentences there were produced, how many imperatives or compound sentence structures, and so on. The next column is for syllable structure. It also has a drop-down and some basic norms. And if you need to edit or change something in this drop-down, you would do that by clicking in the header, going to the link, and if you get this message, make sure to unhide. And it's highlighting the area that you can change. So you would edit that information here. There's links all throughout the file, so hopefully the more you use it, the more you'll be able to take advantage of those links. Next, we're going to go to the Phonological Process column. It's an expandable list, and I created as much information in there in the drop-down as possible. So you get the process, as well as when it's typically suppressed or eliminated. Here, if you click on the header, it'll take you to the columns that you need to edit if you wanted to add more information. You can do that here, and as you add this information, this column, column K, is going to start populating and provide the drop-down in the language sample template. Column for articulation, and this is basically a text typing field. There's no drop-down, and make any notes that are appropriate for that particular utterance. And here we have the age of acquisition. It includes initial consonant blends as well as the general age of acquisition. Again, if you click on the header, it's going to take you to the table. And make sure you look out for this message because there's so many columns and things that it could be hidden. And now once it ungroups the column, you can see the information. And anything that's in this column is going to be available in the drop-down in that language sample template. So if you needed to adjust anything for any reason, you would do that here. And finally, you have a text typing field for pragmatics. If you wanted to list any information in these rows, it would be applicable to the utterance. Also, there are additional columns that are grouped so that they are hidden off the sheet, but they're available and you can expand them if you need to put any additional information for that category. You can put a note here. And if I right-click on that, I can collapse all of the column groups. Now that you've filled in all of the columns and all of the pertinent information related to each and every utterance, we can take a look at the analysis tables that I mentioned earlier. And they're all grouped up, so you may not need all of them. So you would just go to the report that you need and just open it by hitting the little plus sign. And here you see that phonological development, syllable structure, there were these utterances that we made notes for, and it's just going to populate that. Each of these reports work by doing a query function, and so what you're seeing here is basically being imported from the language sample template. You can't delete any of this stuff because it's being brought in by this function. And in each of these reports, this is your most important cell. I can change the formatting of it, but I can't delete it because then everything would be removed. So I'm going to undo that. And if I want to use this information in any kind of report, I would highlight it and then copy it. And let's just say I wanted to bring it into a new sheet. I could right-click and hit Paste Special Values and bring in that information. And then I can format it however I need to format it. I could add a comments column, and that's how that would work. So I'm going to expand each column one at a time, and we'll see what information was brought in. For the semantic relations, there were only 4 utterances. These were the utterances that I put a note for. And let's take a look at pronouns. And here we see our pronoun usage. This section is calling up the irregular past tense column. If the column was blank, this would be blank. So here we have the irregular past column, and I'm going to just delete these. Now they're off the table. Bring them back, and there they go. For syntax and the sentence type, you can adjust anything that you want. You can change the formatting of anything that you prefer seeing. These are somewhat plain in their display so that you can copy and paste them elsewhere for whatever purposes. In this particular section, it's not sorted by the utterance number. You'll see that they're all out of order. Rather, it's sorted by the grammatical accuracy and the sentence structure. So here we see that there were some errors. We see a bunch of exclamatory type utterances. Because I didn't want to factor these in, I excluded those. Here's a specific error. And I see a bunch of simple sentence structure types. I don't see any compound sentence structures. I don't see any complex structures as well. So that's information that I can report on. Here we did take a look at the syllable structure. And just a few more. There's a phonological process, exported information, And here we have the stopping process that was the only thing that was present in this particular language sample. I made a few notes so that something would appear in this report. And there's phonemic acquisition information as well. Finally, pragmatics, we have some notes here that were brought in. Of course, the more that you add per each utterance, the more information you're going to get. And all of these reports can be copied and pasted into your write-up if you choose to, or you can just refer to them here. If you want, there is a written report template here. It's just a suggested layout. Of course, you can edit this any way you like, or you can just use it as a reference or a guide. But this gives you a general sense of how you can put all of that information together. And here in this groups column off to the side, there's some recommendations of what each section might contain. In this section here for the type token ratio, because there are two different ways of reporting, you have an option. You can see that the difference between calculating it manually versus what the report gives you on its own, it's insignificant. But if your results came out different, you now have a choice between which one you would choose. It's showing you off to the side where those percentages are coming from. You can select the one that you want to report on. All of the other information is automatically brought in based on the language sample template and what you've entered here. And there you go. That's everything for this language sample analysis. Thank you so much for watching.